Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, Made for Each Other, the Clark's Nutcracker and Whitebark Pine, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Jenn Morrell. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Take it away, Jen.
Thank you, Rob, and good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to have you all here today and to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And I've enjoyed being an expedition leader with Natural Habitat and other companies, but I really started my love of the outdoors at a young age when our family took most of our summer vacations in the national parks. And through high school, I spent several summers working and living up in the Sierra Nevadas, and I just loved, got a really connection to that place. And so upon graduating from Humboldt State University in Northern California, I took my first position with the National Park Service in Yellowstone National Park and spent the next 15 years serving as a park ranger in different areas across the United States, from the East Coast to the Midwest, but found that my primary love was the mountains and those in the West. And that's where this story takes place, in the Sierra Nevadas and the Rocky Mountains of the Western United States. But this story is one that I kind of want to begin with a larger event that took place last year. Actually, tomorrow it'll be a year exactly. And many of you may have recalled seeing on the news across the United States and across the world different comments and people chiming in about the contributions that this one woman had to not only local communities in the United States, but to people worldwide. And this woman had passed away on November 19th of 2023. And with her passing, her husband, former President Jimmy Carter, made this comment about his wife, Rosalind. Having been married for 77 years, he said, "Rosalind was my equal partner in everything I ever accomplished." And not only was Rosalind Carter influential as an advocate for mental health and research and the performing arts and community and the elderly, they were both influential together in their efforts worldwide and for the United States. And you may think, well, what does that have to do with the topic at hand? And looking at a relationship like that, over 77 years of being committed to one another, but also their influence to our country, I want to look at another relationship that has had a huge impact and continues to on the natural world and to us today. And that's between two different species, a tree, a bird, and the ecosystem that they support. And Made for Each Other is the title of one of Ronald M. Lanner's many books on dendrochronology. He was a professor emeritus of forest resources at Utah State University. And in his book, he details the fascinating relationship between a specific bird and its tree and the ecosystem they support. And today, that tree is threatened. And the people who are striving to save it have a mantra. The true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. And this is the story of such trees. The Forest Service nursery in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, grows 150,000 seedlings a year, 150,000 whitebark pine seedlings. And the whitebark pine is a very special tree, in my opinion. It's in the subgenus Strobus, or the soft pines. And that includes your eastern and western pines, the sugar pine, the limber pine, the very famous bristlecone pine, which is on the White Mountains across from the Sierra Nevada, one of the oldest trees, the oldest things in the world. It also includes pinyon pines. And so of these pines, 2/3 of them are reliant on other animals to disperse their seeds. And whitebark pine is one of those. So that's key. As you look at the different characteristics of this tree, and its primary range is subalpine montane regions on the western United States. So that includes the Sierra Nevada and the Rocky Mountains. They are similar to their cousins, the bristlecone pine, not quite as old. Bristlecone pine can be up to 4,000 years old. But the whitebark pine does have a fairly extensive lifespan, anywhere from 500 to 1,000 years old. But kind of a drawback is they don't actually have producing cones until they're 20 to 30 years of age. So we'll see how that can kind of stunt their sustainability. But they also, the way that the tree is designed in terms of a lot of trees you see, like the sugar pines with their huge pine cones that hang down, or the firs where their cones are standing up on the pines or the limbs. The whitebark pine, their cones are perpendicular to the branch and they come in a circlet around, which we'll see is helpful for animals that are trying to harvest the seeds from those cones. But these cones, inside they have seeds that are like gold. If you're an animal looking for a lot of fat and calories, especially coming towards fall and going into winter, these cones are the best that you can find, or the seeds in those cones. But the seeds themselves, they're only about the size of a small kernel of corn. And there's 75 seeds in this little jar here. And that's approximately the number of seeds that you would find in a cone that's approximately 2 to 3 inches in size. But the problem with these seeds is that they're heavy and they're wingless. So they don't have any way of getting transported like your maple seeds have little wings, or the different types of ways that seeds can naturally disperse, whether they can attach onto an animal because they have some type of kind of Velcro to their seeds, or they have wings and they can be transported by the wind. These seeds don't have a real great mechanism for being dispersed. And that can add to a problem, because now you have these seeds that are really high in caloric value. They're, like I said, little pieces of gold. In fact, when you look at them, they say that they're greater, more rich than chocolate pound for pound. They have the nutritional equivalent of butter, which may not sound great to us, but to an animal that's trying to put on fat during the prior to winter, it's great. And if you take like this, I don't know if you can see these, but 5 to 6 of these seeds, right, is equal to 7,200 calories, just that many. So that's about the equivalent of 14 Big Macs. And they are, each seed is 60% fat, 21% protein, and then the rest carbohydrates. So you don't have to get a lot of these to put on a lot of fat. So this all sounds great. The problem is that the cones are indehiscent, which means they don't open up when the cones are ready or mature, or when the seeds are mature. So now you have these super high caloric resources inside a cone that you can't get to. And that's where another little creature comes into play, and where this relationship is so integral, and that's the Clark's Nutcracker, because we need somebody to get into these storehouses of calories and fat and protein, and that's the Clark's Nutcracker, who's part of the Corvidae family. So that includes ravens and crows and magpies, and their range overlaps that of the whitebark pine and goes a little bit wider than that as well. The thing with Clark's Nutcrackers, though they value the whitebark pine seeds as their priority, they can harvest other seeds, and they will. They can go to lower elevations and they'll get pinyon pines, they'll get Douglas fir pines, pine seeds. And so their primary diet is pine seeds, and it doesn't necessarily have to be whitebark pine, but they will gravitate towards those for a number of reasons, because they're high elevation pine seeds. They can harvest those early and they'll stash them. And when the Clark's Nutcracker comes back in the spring, they will use those to feed their young. And if you're in that high elevation or subalpine area, you may be familiar with a very distinctive call. So that loud is, you can kind of hear the similarity to ravens and crows that Clark's Nutcracker has. But in addition to the fact that they live in this area, there's not too many birds that can get into these indehiscent cones. They're very hard even when they're ripe. And so the fact that they are, like you can see, they are encircled on that branch allows the Clark's Nutcracker to land and stabilize itself while it's drilling into these pines. And it has a really sturdy, long, like dagger-like bill that allows them to nail into the cone and harvest those seeds. And what they do is they are so efficient. They take the seeds and they test them. It's called bill clicking. So they'll toss out maybe the lighter weight seeds that are rotten or there's nothing in them, and they'll take the seed back and forth to test to see if it's viable, if it's a good seed. And then they'll store that seed in what they call a sublingual pouch that's under the tongue, like a trap door beneath their tongue is this large area that they can cache up to 80 to 100 seeds. So that's at least as much as one cone would hold. And you can see in this picture on the right how just below its kind of its gullet there on its neck is all engorged, and that's where it's storing all these seeds. So they store them in this sublingual pouch, and then they can travel up to 20 to 30 miles beyond the tree, and they start stashing or caching these seeds. Research has shown that one Clark's Nutcracker can cache 98,000 seeds in 30,000 different caches. They're obviously not going to remember where all those seeds are, but they've cached them very intricately and just a few inches down, perfect for those seedlings to then regenerate and grow if they don't come back and retrieve them. But they've found that the ones that they do retrieve, they have an incredible memory. And through continued research, there's a couple of researchers who've done quite a bit. In fact, one of my colleagues at Yellowstone, he did his dissertation on Clark's Nutcrackers and whitebark pine in the Sierra Nevada. But Diana Tomback, she was studying the relationship for the last 40 years. She started out as a grad student at the University of Santa Barbara. And then Taza Shamming does her PhD through Cornell University. And she is said to have run the longest field study on nutcrackers, foraging behavior, and habitat use for about 14 years. So through this research and there's observations that they've done, what they've come to realize is that they'll see that these Clark's Nutcracker have cached the seeds and they come back in the spring when the snow is still on the ground and they can find those seeds. And they believe they do it by a system of triangulation, where they're using other stationary points to actually recall where they left or cached those seeds. I wish I had that kind of memory, but I don't. So let's take a look at kind of a little video here of their foraging and how they do that bill clicking and storage in their sublingual pouch. So you notice that one went right down. Ooh. You toss that one out. There's a bill clicking there. Goes back and forth to the sides. Yep, that's a good one. That's not a good one. And so they'll harvest those seeds, you say up to 80 to 100, and then go and cache those. And so it's no wonder that now we see how these two together are soulmates. They call keystone mutualists because the nutcrackers rely on whitebark pine as a crucial food source, and the pines rely on nutcrackers to disperse and plant their seeds. But in addition to that, more than 100 other species of plants and animals benefit from that mutualism between tree and bird. A mutualism being a relationship in which both entities benefit from that relationship. And they call them keystone mutualists because if you go back to Roman times, that's where the word keystone came in, primarily when they were building bridges. And the last stone that they would place would be the keystone that would join the arches together. And without that keystone, the rest of it would fall apart. And so ecologists took that term and they used it in terms of local ecology and how species and like food webs are formed and interact. And those species that not only are beneficial to one another or a few animals, but have a huge impact. So a species that increases the biodiversity of a community because of the important role that it plays in the life cycle of many other species is considered a keystone species, because if it was taken away, it would dramatically affect everything else. So I want to bring you guys in for a little demonstration here. If you can imagine that we're all together in a room and we are playing that wonderful game. Many of you may be playing it at Thanksgiving this year. Jenga. Right? So Jenga is a great example of you have this tower, you have this ecosystem, but if you begin to pull out certain key aspects of it, there's a chance that it could collapse. So if I could have Rob help us out here, you'll see certain of these statements around this image in the middle. Each statement is a characteristic of it's either true of the Clark's Nutcracker or of the whitebark pine. And so I'll read a statement, and then if someone would like to write in the chat section or raise your hand and give an answer in terms of, do you think that that characteristic matches the whitebark pine or the Clark's Nutcracker? And we'll see what happens if those characteristics are removed, if we lose those, how that can affect the entire ecosystem. So let's give this a try. Let's start out with this statement. Are responsible for 99% of whitebark seed dispersal. Is that the whitebark pine or the Clark's Nutcracker?
All right, everyone, if you have a guess, feel free to submit that in the chat feature in your control panel. Just go to the three lines at the top right corner of your screen to access it. We've got one answer for Nutcracker.
Very good. Yes.
And yep, it looks
Nutcrackers
like
are responsible. I'm sorry.
I was saying, yep, people
Oh,
are chiming in Nutcracker.
okay. Nutcracker.
Yep, we've got half a dozen now who all say Nutcracker. So right on.
Oh, very good. So yes, the Nutcrackers are responsible for 99% of whitebark seed dispersal. So if you take that out of the ecosystem, we're going to see this relationship begin to totter. What about a rich source of dietary fat for grizzly and black bears? Do we think that's the bird or the tree? Do we have any responses, Rob?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm afraid you couldn't hear me.
Oh,
Most everybody is saying the white bark pine. We have two or three for the nutcracker, but almost everybody is saying the pine.
very good. Yes. The white bark pines, the seeds of the white bark pine, are a rich source of dietary fat for grizzly and black bears. And so it's not just the Clark's nutcracker that benefits from them, but it is the other animals. So if you take one of those, that characteristic out, then you're going to affect not only Clark's nutcracker, but grizzly bears, black bears, and we'll find some other species as well. How about serve as a food source for nutcrackers, squirrels, bears, and other species?
Are lots of tree, pine cone, nuts, white bark pine, the tree.
Perfect.
Um, yeah,
Yep. So the same as the previous one, that those seeds they serve for numerous other species. So we have two for the pine, one for the bird, and let's see. How about have multiple tools that allow them to access, harvest, and cache pine nuts? Is that the bird or the tree?
we're getting nutcracker, nutcracker, bird, 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 nutcracker.
Yes.
The
Yep.
bird,
We
yes.
talked about the Clark's Nutcracker. They have that really solid, sturdy beak. They also have um, their feet and their tail, much like a woodpecker, allows them to have some kind of torque in terms of their ability to get into the pine itself. And then in terms of stashing those nuts in their sublingual pouch and their remarkable memory of caching them and retrieving them, but also leaving those that they've already cached, that allows the whitebark pine to regenerate from those. So very good job. And that also makes them, as we see here in the corner, act as an unpaid crew of avian tree planters. on a scale that far exceeds anything the United States Forest Service could afford. So they are providing a service that is unpaid and a great benefit to the rest of the ecosystem in a way that we might not realize. What about decreased spring flooding? Which animal or which species do you think has an effect on that?
The tree, whitebark pine, the pine, the tree, the whitebark pine. Lots of people saying the pine.
Yes, yes, because I'm not quite sure how the Clark's Nutcracker could, but if we look at this relationship together, you could, in um, a secondary way, see how that Clark's Nutcracker, in helping to propagate the tree, would also help to decrease the spring flooding because it's the tree. Up at subalpine elevation, we might not realize how much it has an effect on us thousands of feet below, because those winters where we get a lot of snowpack, if there's no trees up at high elevation to provide the shade and the root structure to maintain that snow, it's all going to melt very quickly and we'll only have it for a short time in the beginning of spring and summer. But the whitebark pine helps to establish that kind of a reservoir and lets the snow melt a little bit less quickly and decreases spring flooding, and also helps to function as a storehouse of water in higher elevations. So you kind of get the idea of how, if you begin to remove, if somehow the tree or the Clark's Nutcracker is affected in some way, it's going to affect all of these different parts of that have a great effect on the ecosystem, to the extent that if you pull out enough of those, it's going to fall apart. And that's why these are just a couple of examples of not only us as Homo sapiens down below, but ones who really are dependent on that need for fat and high protein food resources, especially prior to going into winter. And one of them is the grizzly bear that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with in the Rocky Mountain region. And then we have the red tree squirrel, aka pine squirrel, or chicory, which if you've been in the Sierra Nevada or the Rocky Mountains, you'll recall this. The red tree squirrel, this guy cracks me up. He's got so much energy and has to be somewhere like ADHD, just very, very intense about their job. And these squirrels, you see this squirrel right here, it is surrounded by what we call a squirrel midden. All of those are the remains of cones that they have harvested. You can see what I like to call these little corn cobs. They're sitting on the left-hand side here, and all the bracts of the cones, as they peel through those cones and they get the seeds and they store them frenetically, getting ready for winter themselves. But they do a tremendous amount of work, and they don't stop. And if you're in the forest, and I would often be giving programs in the forest and hear that, and sometimes they'd throw cones down at you because you're in their territory. They feel that you are going to invade their food resource. But the amount, they're so dexterous, the amount of work that they do is tremendous. And so they rely very heavily on a lot of different pines, but the whitebark pine being one. And they'll go up to the top of the trees, and what they do to get the pine seeds, they'll gnaw at the branch of the tree and remove that cone and then bury it or gnaw it open on some of those bracts. But they become what I like to call the grizzly bear's Instacart or DoorDash. They've done all this work, and then this lazy old grizzly bear comes lumbering up to this squirrel midden, which you can see all of that debris that he's going through right there. And because they smell it, their greatest sense is a sense of smell. And so once those bears, they can smell a stash 3 feet under the snow. And I think I've got some background noise here. Let me see if I can. Did I? No? Okay. And so they can smell those middens even under the snow, and they'll dig down and they'll consume all that squirrel's work, which is unfortunate. But these middens can be 20 to 30 feet across. They're huge. And hopefully those bears won't get all the squirrel's hard work. But because grizzly bears don't climb trees, as you may well know, black bears can, but grizzly bears, their claws are too long. They stay primarily on the ground. And so having those nuts, especially in high elevation, as the summer comes to a close, they're going up to get the army cutworm moss that aggregate in the talus slopes, as well as these really high fat, high protein nuts. And during good cone crop years, or what they call mass years in Yellowstone, they found that bears feed almost exclusively on pine seeds in the autumn. And they've also found that adult female grizzly bears that eat more pine seeds have more surviving cubs than those who don't. And so when we look at a bear food chart, bears are omnivores. They're actually primarily, at least in the Rocky Mountains and Sierra Nevadas, the black bears, but the grizzly bears up in the Rocky Mountains are primarily vegetarian. And if you look at this chart, you'll see, if you recall, Frank and John Craighead, they did a lot of grizzly bear research back in from 1943 up until 2009. Carrie Gunther, who's the bear biologist for Yellowstone National Park, has taken some of their research, and you may recognize these two images are from Grizzly 399, and they were taken down by Pacific Creek, her once home, and so she's eating primarily berries and such. But through this bar chart, you'll see that over half of grizzly bear's diet is primarily graminoids, and those are mostly a variety of different plants and forbs and such. Then you'll see ants, and then third are whitebark pine seeds. And so even though it's a short amount of time where they're harvesting these seeds, they harvest them in large quantities. And it's amazing to me that you get such a large animal like a grizzly bear that's eating things like ants and moss and whitebark pine seeds. It seems so small, and yet they can gain, up to 3 to 5 pounds a day on that type of a diet. And it's really important for reproduction for bears come winter. And so we see the life cycle of the whitebark pine and its relationship with not only the Clark's nutcracker, but many other species, including the red tree squirrel and the grizzly bear, and how those cycle and work together to affect numerous different species, but also the ecosystem as a whole. And that's why this artist gave this rendition of, if you can, try and find all the different species in this painting of those animals that are reliant on this keystone mutualistic relationship. And you say, well, that sounds great. It is. It's wonderful. I love looking at different species and how they are intricately designed not only to work together, but to support huge numbers of other species. And you think, well, that's wonderful. It makes for a beautiful forest. It sustains our snowpack. It provides food for other animals. I don't see what the problem is. And there wouldn't be a problem except for what Diana Tombach and many researchers had begun to notice decades ago. And that was this, that in the early 1900s, half of whitebark pine forests were dead. Scores of hillsides, and people were sounding the alarm, were saying something's going wrong here, but people weren't quite listening. They said, well, there is a general cyclic die-off that forests will have, or certain species will have. They seem to regenerate and come back. But they were seeing this time and time again in greater and greater numbers. And what they found was three major threats to whitebark pine. One is the native mountain pine beetle, and the second is the non-native whitebark pine blister rust. And in addition to that is just increased temperatures in climate that's making it even more difficult for the whitebark pine to fight these two battles. So the mountain pine beetle, like I say, is native to this area, and these two species, the pine beetle and the whitebark pine, have lived together for centuries. And the whitebark pine has natural defenses against the pine beetle, such as this one on the left, which is called pitch out. And like when you get a splinter in your hand or your finger, your body is going to begin to, you'll see oftentimes it'll pus, it'll try and push that splinter out. Well, the whitebark pine does the same thing. It can produce a sap that pushes it out. When a pine bark beetle comes in, it'll suffocate the beetle and kill it. But those beetles that do get in through the bark and into the cambium layer, on the right here, you'll see they will form these beetle galleries. So they'll come up in these vertical galleries, and they'll begin to eat away, and then they'll make these horizontal inroads here into the cambium layer. And you see all those white dots. Those are the young, or the small bits of the pine bark beetle. So those will begin to fester and grow in the pine, and then come spring, they'll winter in there, and then come spring, they'll exit and they'll go and infiltrate another tree. And so they use the tree for their life cycle within that cambium layer, and if they do so enough, they can girdle the tree and kill it. And so that the pine bark beetle has been a source of consternation for the whitebark pine for some time, but it was able to withstand that. And we'll see that pine bark beetle, you may say, oh, that's beautiful. I've seen some of that before. And this is actually beetle-killed pine ceiling. You may have seen the blue pine wall paneling. And this is a whole different relationship here. It's called blue stain fungus, and it's fairly marketable and become more popular. But it's a relationship between this pine bark beetle and a fungus. It's a symbiotic relationship between those two, but it's a parasitic relationship to the tree. So the blue stain fungus actually travels from tree to tree in the mouth of the pine bark beetle, and the fungus stops the tree from producing that resin that pitches out the pine bark beetle, and so it improves the environment for the beetle. So the tree is trying, it's 2 against 1 here. And not only that, and here's some of those die-offs from the pine blue stain fungus. But then you have this non-native species. White pine blister rust is native to Asia. It was introduced to Europe in the 1700s, and then it was transported to North America in the 1900s for forest outplanting. And this is more of a threat to the whitebark pine than the pine bark beetle, because the tree doesn't have defenses, or has very few, to this white pine blister rust. It goes in it has both a primary host and an alternate host. So it goes in 2 cycles where the spores will affect the tree branches through its needles. So those needles begin to go brown, and you'll see as the fungus gets towards the branch, it'll form these little cankers, and the fruiting bodies from those cankers can produce spores that go to the alternate host. But if these cankers get to the bole or the main trunk of the tree, they can kill the tree right there. And so they'll get into, like I say, that cambium layer where all the food and the water, the xylem and the phloem are being transported. If that's severed, then the tree can't survive. And these spores, they're then infected from pines. They need this alternate host to continue their cycle. And they usually focus on ribes, like currants. Those spores get on, and they'll get on the underside of the leaf. And then the spores from those are released to reinfect other pines. So it's kind of like sepsis, an infection that if it's not controlled, it can kill you. It can kill a tree. And so they have this kind of tripart complex where you have the ribes, alternate host, and the pine and the fungus. So what can help? I mean, can anything stop this beetle and this fungus that are just taking all out assault on the whitebark pine? And historically, we've seen some natural barriers to that, and one is extreme cold. You'll see this frosty bison here on the left, and up at elevations where the whitebark pine resides, near tree line, it's not unusual to get weeks of -30 and below freezing temperatures, and that will knock out the pine bark beetle. And so historically, the pine bark beetle will come in, the tree could fight against small infestations, and then cold would knock them out, and the tree would be able to come back the next year. Similar to fire. Fire would also come through, and whitebark pine do really well at regenerating after fire and withstanding small amounts of fire, and that would also take out the pine bark beetle. With the suppression of fire for decades, since the 70s up until this time, and we're not just recently have been reinstigating or allowing fire to take its natural place in the ecosystem, those pine bark beetles have taken advantage of the reduction of both those colder temperatures, as we see kind of a warming trend right now where we don't get sustained really negative temperatures at high elevations as we did historically, and fire may not have been as prevalent. So now they found that pine bark beetles can not only produce once but twice in a season. And so one of the things that research scientists have done, this picture on the right, are those are pheromone packets, and they're anti-aggregation pheromone, which means that it repels the attacks on fully occupied trees. So the pine bark beetles will give off these pheromones to other pine bark beetles, saying that we're here, and there's not enough room. The tree's full, so they go to another tree. So what scientists have done is taken that anti-pheromone and they'll staple it to a tree that they believe has a good chance at surviving, and in an effort to move the pine bark beetles onto other areas. But as you can imagine, that's really labor intensive and has maybe a small impact to the size of the forest of whitebark pines. And so they've tried, and yet they're seeing that there's just too much for the tree to withstand. And so scientists and biologists and dendrochronologists different agencies were so excited when finally, after decades of people sounding the alarm, that the whitebark pine received threatened species designation on December 15th of 2022. And numerous agencies chimed in and said, yes, this is fantastic, this is great. And you think, well, so it's designated. How is that going to change the situation? But what it can do is put out more public information, give more protection to the species, and also provide funding, which is huge, to be able to do some of the efforts to hopefully save this incredible tree.
This is how AI optimizes.
Uh-oh. Hold on.
The whitebark pine has been listed as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has found significant threats will challenge the tree found throughout the West, including here in Montana. Providing Endangered Species Act protections to whitebark pine will boost new and ongoing research efforts to conserve the species. The protections for a whitebark pine also make it illegal to remove, possess, or damage the tree on federal lands. A news release calls the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes Forestry Department a partner in the effort. CSKT forestry officials say, quote, whitebark pine is not only a keystone species for this balance, but also a part of our first foods and culture. CSKT supports the listing whitebark pine to help ensure the protection and restoration of the land and our culture.
So we see that now it has more help in terms of the efforts to preserve whitebark pine by this designation. And one of those organizations that's been formed is the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation. And this video gives a little idea of what are some of the measures that they are taking. And the good news is that they've found some of these whitebark pine trees they call plus trees that have a small resistance to the whitebark pine blister rust. And if they can take those trees and reproduce those on the landscape, there might be a chance for this tree, just so that we're not too late.
We're going to be caging in today.
We have no cure for white pine blister rust, and the only recourse we have is to look for the small number of individuals in each population that seems to have natural genetic resistance. Those individuals are the foundation of restoring whitebark pine.
These cones will be shipped to the Coeur d'Alene nursery in Idaho and eventually used to grow seedlings in the nursery.
The seedlings we are growing have some level of resistance to blister rust. On average, we're growing about 150,000 seedlings per year. 150,000 one-year-old seedlings, 150,000 two-year-old seedlings.
When we plant trees, the first thing is we really look for an excellent planting location. We're looking for a log that's down, or maybe a stump, something that's going to provide shade and hold some moisture and give it the best life and the best start that it can have.
It's very gratifying to go out and see these seedlings on the landscape. It is very humbling, I'll say, that we are having such an impact. And in this special case of whitebark pine, where this is a threatened species, we're able to recreate it and put it back on site.
I have a lot of hope for the future of whitebark pine because I see the passion in the people who are working to restore it. They're doing the research, planting trees, collecting cones, growing all the seedlings. And I look at all these marvelous, passionate, committed people, and I can't help but have hope.
We have a lot of people that care about the fate of this tree, but we're realistic because we've moved an inch and we know that we've got a mile to go.
I am incredibly optimistic about the future of whitebark. I am incredibly sad about what the landscape looks like currently, but I can't imagine looking at this as the death knell. It's not.
Restoration is totally possible. We've done it, we are doing it, and we'll continue to do it. I want to be able to leave something for the next generation so that they can participate and see what I'm seeing and experience what I experience. When you're up at that high elevation and you're sitting in a whitebark pine stand, the Clark Nutcrackers are flying around, and it's magical. And I shouldn't be the only one who gets to experience that.
You got to think like, this is not just for me, it's for the future generation. The forestry program, for the first time in our history, planted 2,000 trees. I won't see those trees mature, but our grandchildren and our children are going to see those trees mature. And that's, to me, what it's all about.
About 90% of whitebark pine occurs on public lands in the United States. So it's critically important that we, as public land management agencies, are actively involved in whitebark pine conservation.
I think the responsibility to restore whitebark pine rests with us all. No matter where the pine grow, we all have an obligation to make sure that this species, which is just so critical for high elevation habitat, doesn't wink out on our watch.
The more that I've worked with whitebark, the more that I have hope. Because I understand now that there are things we can do about it. We have a plan forward. We know how to restore the species. Now we need the resources to do that. One of my favorite quotes, it goes, "The true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit."
So I hope all of you will take that to heart as well, and that wherever you're at, like she said, it's even if you're not in the mountains of the West, the relationships that we see between whitebark pine, between Clark's Nutcracker, between other species have an effect on not only local communities but worldwide. And so I hope that this just gives you a little view into one situation, one story that I hope has grabbed your heart like it has mine in sustaining these species that are so key to our ecosystem. So thank you for joining me today, And I hope you'll go out and learn more about the whitebark pine. They've gotten a new film that they show in Yellowstone at the Old Faithful Visitor Center and in many other areas in the Rocky Mountains and even the Sierra Nevadas. And if you want more information, you can definitely go to the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation. They have a lot of the updates of current projects and how they've moved forward since getting that threatened species designation.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen. Now, before we start in with the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that if you do have questions, you can submit them via the question field in your control panel. All right, let's get to some of these questions. So, do bears help disperse the seeds of the pine?
They don't necessarily help disperse the seeds. They're more of a consumer. And so by the time they go through the digestive system of a bear, they're not going to be that viable. So they're more on the consumptive end.
Gotcha. Are other pines affected by the Asian fungus?
That's a good question. I would think so in terms of just the soft pines in general. But I know this is specific to the whitebark pine, but I have not heard if it's had an effect as detrimentally as it has on the whitebark pine forest on other pines. So I don't think that. I think it's an definitely a function of it has to have that alternate host. So you have to have an area where there's like ribes or those currents, because they have in the past, in the 40s, actually tried to rip out all the ribes in an area to break that cycle. And of course, that wasn't going to work. You can't take out all the ribes. And so it does have to have certain elevational and species components. And so I think it's fairly focused on the whitebark pine.
Gotcha. Thank you. Do woodpeckers go after the white pine beetles and the trees as well?
Oh, the pine bark beetles in terms of feeding upon them?
Yes.
Sure. Yeah. They'll just like any other ants or beetles that you would find in the beneath the bark of a tree. Those birds can help to reduce the number of those, but not to apparently now not to the extent that it's those other factors are increasing the viability of the white or the pine bark beetles. But they can get the pine bark beetle does have benefits, I think, in a positive way to not only the fungus but also to other birds too.
Gotcha. So one of our guests is questioning whether only having that one nursery in Idaho is a good idea. Seems like putting all the eggs in one basket. Do they grow multiple? Are there multiple sites for growing these seedlings, or is it just in Idaho?
No, that's a great question. They do have for at least the Forest Service, the one in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, is just one of 6 in the United States Forest Service nursery system. But since this is primarily a Western United States issue, there's 4 in the West of those nurseries. There's one in the Midwest, and then there's one in the Great Lakes area. So that's one in the West where they're doing a lot of those. And as you noticed, the man from the Native American tribes there, the Kootenai Salish, up in Glacier area, they're also propagating some of those trees and putting them back on the landscape too. It's not just the U.S. Forest Service.
So Canada is involved as well?
Yes.
Excellent. So Are we have some white pines on the East Coast. Are they the same as the trees that we're talking about?
That I don't know. I don't believe so. I don't believe they're the same species, but I'm not entirely positive.
Gotcha. So you showed a picture of the WBP ecosystem, a painting of it. Um, One of our guests loves it and is wondering, is there any way they can get a copy of that picture? Is there a print available? Is that your work?
Oh, it's not my work, and I actually that was one that I had. I'm trying to remember where, if that was in a publication or if that was on the web in reference to whitebark pine. It might have been an article I was reading, but it didn't have the artist's name, or I would have noted it on the bottom there. So I'm not sure how to direct you to it, because I can go back and see if I can find like I said, the article or the website at least that I got it from. But I don't know who originally did it. It wasn't notated as the artist on there.
Gotcha. Well, thanks anyway. We do appreciate it. Well, unfortunately, Jen, that's going to be the last question that we do have time for today. So I'd like to hand it back to you for any closing comments you have for us.
Well, I appreciate all of you coming today, and like I say, I hope that this has kind of spurred you on to find out more about the current situation between the whitebark pine and the Clark's Nutcracker. And what's encouraging to me is that it's something that's been brought to the forefront, and now there's funding for at least a plan in terms of hopefully regenerating that species. And the fact that the whitebark pine itself has an internal resistance, as they've found, and helping to hopefully speed up that process so it's in time. So if you hear about this or in your neck of the woods and you can support those efforts in any way, or even better, come out and do some hiking in the high elevation forests and experience for yourself just that, the whitebark pine forest. It's unique to any other, as I'm sure many of you have been, maybe up in the subalpine or alpine zone. It's a formidable place and can be very windswept and austere, but it's beautiful, and it has its own special place to it.
Jen, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. Now, if you're interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, give us a call at 800-543-8917, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.